The year is 1813, and the smoke of battle still drifts across the plains of Saxony. The ground is scarred by cannon fire, the rivers thick with the blood of men who had fought at Leipzig, the so-called Battle of Nations. Napoleon has retreated, his once brilliant star dimmed but not extinguished. In a quiet chamber, as autumn fog presses against the windows, a treaty lies on the table, the Frankfurt Proposal. It promises peace. France, though smaller, would keep its natural frontiers, the Rhine, the Alps, the Pyrenees boundaries that would make it powerful still, feared and admired across the continent. For a moment, history balanced on the edge of a quill. What if he had signed? What if Napoleon had accepted a compromise and ended the wars before the road led to Waterloo, before his exile on Elba, before the lonely island of St. Helena? And now, as you listen, wherever you are, perhaps in your home at night, perhaps in a quiet room with the lights dimmed, you become part of this shared memory network. You are one among thousands drifting together through imagination and history. Before we begin, I invite you to press the subscribe button so that our journey can continue through many more nights of reflection, many more stories that bend and reshape the paths of history. The room is dimly lit by 2 candles, their flames bending slightly in the draft that slips under the door. Napoleon sits at a large oak desk, the weight of maps and dispatches spread before him. His hands, once so decisive in command, now rest motionless. Across the table, folded neatly, is the document brought by envoys of the Austrian statesman Metternich, the Frankfurt Proposal. It is not surrender. It is not humiliation. It is an invitation to step back from endless war. It offers France dignity, respect, and permanence. The empire's borders would shrink but remain formidable. The Rhine would guard the east, the Pyrenees the south, the Alps the frontier. A France strong and secure, not sprawling but defensible. Yet Napoleon does not move. His quill is dipped in ink, but the black drop clings to the metal tip, trembling as if it too senses hesitation. The year is late, the winter approaching. Napoleon is weary, but unwilling to admit it. He has lost battles before, and always returned, stronger, more cunning, more determined. The very essence of his legend lies in his refusal to accept limits. To sign would mean admitting that the tide has turned, that the age of expansion is over. For a man who once believed that destiny itself bent to his will, such an admission is almost unbearable. And so the moment stretches, like the pause between heartbeats, between inhale and exhale. Beyond the chamber, Paris waits. The people are exhausted by years of conscription, by taxes, by the endless arrival of wounded soldiers from Spain, from Russia, from Germany. Mothers long for peace, veterans dream of rest, children grow up in a world where fathers return maimed or not at all. The streets still hum with life, but beneath the chatter of markets is the low rumble of fatigue. Had Napoleon signed, what relief would have swept across the boulevards? How many families would have sighed in unison, knowing that their sons would live to grow old? Yet one cannot forget the marshals who surround him, those men forged in the furnace of battle. Ney, Murat, Soult, Davout. They have risen with him, earned their titles and wealth by conquest. To them, peace feels like an unfinished campaign, a melody cut short before its final note. Would they have welcomed the treaty as salvation, or viewed it as betrayal? Around the desk, though absent in body, their voices echo in Napoleon's mind, urging him toward action, toward defiance. And so we ask, what if? What if the man who had built his empire through force of will and relentless campaigns had allowed himself to bend, just once, to the current of diplomacy? Could he have transformed from conqueror to statesman, from emperor of battles to emperor of peace? The candle flame flickers, the ink drop quivers, the silence grows heavy. Outside the palace walls, the world holds its breath. In Vienna, Metternich calculates how to maintain the balance of power. wondering if Napoleon will finally concede. In London, ministers watch the sea, imagining whether British fleets will face French rivals again. In Berlin, Prussian patriots still burn for revenge, but even they wonder whether their cause will vanish with a stroke of the pen. In St. Petersburg, Alexander broods, torn between forgiveness and vengeance, remembering the ashes of Moscow. The whole continent is poised on this fragile hinge, waiting for Napoleon's decision. And here lies the heart of our journey. To dwell in that suspended moment, to let imagination wander through corridors that history never walked. If Napoleon signs, Europe does not march to Waterloo. There is no 100 days, no exile to Elba, no ship bearing him to St. Helena. Instead, there is a France smaller yet unbroken, feared yet stable, perhaps able to reform and endure. What becomes of the 19th century, then? Does revolution stir later or sooner? Do monarchies feel secure or still tremble at the memory of 1789? Does industry grow under peace or stagnate without the fires of war? The sound in the chamber is only the faint crackle of the fire, the rustle of parchment, the distant muffled hoofbeats of horses in the courtyard. The quill hovers, ink ready, destiny waiting. To accept is to preserve, to refuse is to gamble. The gambler within him has never declined a wager, and yet what if this time he did? Imagine the quill descending, the scratch of ink across paper. Imagine the sigh of relief spreading like ripples in a pond, from Paris to Vienna to London to St. Petersburg. Imagine the world tilting onto a different course, one where millions of lives, millions of stories, unfold along gentler paths, but the moment does not resolve. It lingers, suspended, as if time itself refuses to move forward. The candle gutters, the ink thickens on the quill, and the listener, you become part of this hesitation. For in the imagination, unlike in history, the choice remains open. We do not close the door, we leave it ajar, inviting possibility. The sound you hear now is the faint scratching of a pen, not yet writing, but testing, as though history itself is practicing its lines. And so part 1 ends, not with resolution, but with a question hanging in the air. If the quill had fallen, would the wars have ended, or would they only have changed shape, quieter but still unyielding? The fire crackles, the ink waits, the empire breathes in silence. The ink does not yet touch the paper. The quill hovers, trembling like a breath caught between words. Outside the chamber, beyond the firelit silence of Napoleon's study, the world waits in stillness. Across Europe, the rumble of war has quieted for the first time in years, not because the guns have been silenced by peace, but because winter has slowed their roar. Soldiers on both sides huddle in their tents, their coats patched, their boots worn thin, their bellies filled with little more than coarse bread. And yet, even in that stillness, the air is heavy with expectation. It is as though the entire continent has drawn in a long breath, and does not yet know whether to sigh with relief or cry out in fresh fury. In Vienna, the diplomats' salons are filled with murmurs. Metternich himself paces his study, the candlelight glinting off his sharp eyes. He is a man who thinks in balances, in scales weighed with caution. He imagines the map of Europe like a chessboard, and he places his pieces with care. For him, the Frankfurt Proposal is not a gift to Napoleon, but a shield for Austria, a chance to preserve the fragile harmony of kingdoms threatened by the storm of revolution and empire. He wonders, as the night stretches on, whether the French emperor's pride will be his salvation or his ruin. He wonders if he has offered too much or too little, and whether the board will collapse into chaos no matter what answer comes. Far to the north, in St. Petersburg, Tsar Alexander remembers the winter 2 years past, when Moscow lay in ashes and his people fled before the Grand Army. His mind is haunted by smoke, by fire, by the strange triumph of survival in defeat. He has become a man of visions, speaking of destiny and divine mission. To him, Napoleon is more than a rival. He is the scourge of God, sent to test nations and bring ruin upon the proud. If Napoleon signs, does Alexander forgive? Or does he see the compromise as merely a pause, a mask before the next storm? The snow falls heavy on Russian roads, muffling the hoofbeats of the couriers who carry news of peace or war, but in the Tsar's heart the thunder has not ceased. Across the Channel, Britain watches with wary eyes. The island kingdom has fought Napoleon longer than any, pouring treasure into coalitions, building a navy that has strangled French trade, and yet never managing to topple the emperor by land. The ministers in London know that victory is near, but also that their people are weary, that gold cannot flow forever, that ships must one day rest. If Napoleon accepts peace, Britain claims triumph, yet it is a triumph without the satisfaction of conquest. Will they accept France still mighty, still seated on the Rhine, when their dream has been a Europe free of his shadow? In quiet drawing rooms, where the rain beats softly against the windows, English gentlemen sip their brandy and ask one another if the peace of Frankfurt is victory or merely delay. And in Berlin, the Prussians tremble between hope and anger. Their country has been trampled, their pride insulted, their fields bled dry. They long for revenge, for the day when Prussian steel can strike back and reclaim honor. But what if the war ends now, before revenge is won? Will they accept peace forced upon them by Austria's diplomacy? Or will they seethe in silence, preparing for another generation to rise with swords once more? The officers drill in frozen courtyards, their breath steaming in the air, while their king waits for news that will tell him whether Prussia must bow or rise. And what of Paris? Imagine the city at dusk, the lamps flickering to life along the Seine, the vendors closing their stalls, the women drawing their shawls closer against the evening chill. The news of Frankfurt has not yet spread, but whispers circulate. Perhaps peace is near. Perhaps the emperor will grant them rest. The people do not know the details, only that their fate hangs on a decision made by one man at one desk. In taverns and bakeries, in workshops and salons, men and women speak in hushed voices of their longing for peace. If Napoleon signs, Paris will erupt in celebration, its bells pealing in every quarter. If he refuses, the weary city will brace itself for more conscription, more hunger, more mourning. All of Europe is suspended, as though in a frozen tableau, waiting for the brushstroke that will decide its colors. And here, in this suspended state, one may wander through possibility. Suppose Napoleon accepts. What happens in the hours that follow? Couriers race from Paris to Vienna, from Vienna to London, their horses' hooves striking sparks on the frozen roads. Ministers awaken in the night to read the words they scarcely dared believe. The guns fall silent along the rivers. The soldiers stumble from their trenches, blinking in disbelief, as orders arrive to cease fire. A ripple spreads, like the first crack of ice on a frozen lake, small at first, but widening with unstoppable force. But perhaps not all hearts are quieted. Imagine the faces of soldiers who feel cheated of glory, the marshals whose careers have been fed by conquest. Imagine the patriots in Berlin, who see in peace only betrayal. Imagine the Tsar who broods in his palace, whispering that the struggle is not yet ended. Europe breathes, but is it a sigh of relief or a gasp of withheld rage? History as we know it marched forward into blood, into Waterloo, into exile and legend. But here, we linger in that pause, in that Europe where the breath has not yet been released. It is a moment delicate as glass, transparent and fragile. If Napoleon signs, does the continent step carefully into a gentler century, or does the glass shatter, sharp edges cutting new wounds, different but no less deep? The ink still clings to the quill, the fire burns lower, the hour grows late. Somewhere in the darkness, a clock ticks, each second another chance for destiny to turn. Europe waits, suspended in silence, poised between triumph and tragedy. And as the flames gutter, as the ink glistens, we move forward. We move from the chambers of kings and ministers to the lives of ordinary people, those who carry the weight of these decisions without ever being asked their will, For it is in their faces, their sorrows, their joys, that the true consequence of peace or war is written. And so the image fades now, from marble palaces to cobbled streets, from ministers' maps to markets and homes. The people wait, and their longing fills the air like the low hum of a distant hymn. The cobblestones glisten with a sheen of winter rain, and in the narrow streets of Paris, the sound of wheels rattling over stone mixes with the cries of vendors closing their stalls. The smell of roasted chestnuts lingers in the air, mingling with the damp scent of wool cloaks and horse manure. Children tug at their mothers' skirts, asking for sweets that are too expensive now, while men gather at corners with pipes in their mouths, talking in tones low enough to disguise their fear. It is here, among these faces, that the silence of Napoleon's hesitation takes on its most human form. For every mother, every father, every child knows what the emperor's choice will mean, though none of them will ever hold the quill or touch the parchment. They remember the years when victory brought parades. After Austerlitz, after Jena, the streets had filled with flags and music. Soldiers marched home with bright eyes, their uniforms still shining, their voices filled with pride. Shopkeepers profited, innkeepers toasted, and the name of Napoleon was spoken with awe. But that was long ago. Now, after Spain's guerrilla war, after the frozen retreat from Moscow, after the endless lists of dead and wounded, triumph tastes bitter. The veterans who return are hollow-eyed, their legs missing, their arms bound in bandages. They limp through the city like ghosts of past glories, reminders of the cost that victory demands. If the emperor signs, the people imagine something like spring returning after a long frost. Markets filled with goods once more, not luxuries, but bread, wine, meat in steady supply. The bells of Notre Dame ringing in thanksgiving, their tones rolling down the Seine and over the rooftops like waves of relief. Young men would remain at their trades instead of marching to the front. Lovers would marry without the shadow of the battlefield between them. Mothers would not count the days until conscription dragged away their sons. For once, a peace not built on the defeat of France, but on the recognition of her strength, a peace that could give the city a chance to breathe again. Picture the cafes along the boulevards, their tables crowded with citizens who no longer whisper but laugh. The waiters carrying trays with steaming cups of coffee and glasses of wine. Street musicians tuning their violins to play again in public squares. Imagine the rhythm of Paris shifting from the drumbeat of war to the steady hum of daily life. In this alternate world, where Napoleon accepts the Frankfurt Proposal, joy does not come as a triumph of conquest, but as a collective sigh, a release of pressure long endured. Yet even here, in this imagined relief, questions remain. Would the people trust Napoleon again? Or would they watch him with suspicion, wondering whether his word of peace was only a pause before another gamble, another war? They love him still, many of them. For he rose from the revolution's ashes, a man of the people who became their emperor. But they are tired, so tired, of paying the price for his ambition. Perhaps the treaty would restore their faith. Or perhaps it would only buy him time while their hearts drifted slowly toward disillusionment. Walk further through the city, down into the poorer quarters, where the narrow alleys twist between crowded houses. Here the air is thick with the smell of smoke from coal fires, with the cries of hungry children. These families do not speak of strategy or diplomacy. They speak only of bread. For them, war has meant shortages, higher prices, the steady dread of conscription knocking on their doors. If peace comes, they will not analyze the clauses of Frankfurt or the meaning of natural frontiers. They will simply know that the ovens are warm again, that the bread is affordable, that fathers remain at home. For these people, the relief would be as immediate and tangible as the loaf in their hands. Beyond Paris, across France, the same longing stretches. In the vineyards of Bordeaux, peasants dream of harvesting, without fear that their sons will be taken. In the fields of Normandy, farmers imagine plowing furrows with their children laughing beside them, rather than counting gravestones in churchyards. In the southern towns, where memories of Spanish resistance bleed across the border, villagers pray that peace will mean no more soldiers tramping through their streets. The sound they long for is not the roll of drums, but the rustle of wind in wheat, the trickle of water in canals, the laughter of neighbors at market fairs. And think of the soldiers themselves, those men who have given their youth to Napoleon's armies. Many of them are weary beyond words. They march because duty compels them, because their comrades beside them make the burden lighter. But in their hearts, a hope lingers. Perhaps this war will be the last. Perhaps the Emperor will show mercy to them, as well as to the Empire. For the veterans, peace means laying down muskets, returning to farms, finding wives, raising children. In their dreams, the clang of bayonets becomes the clink of tools in workshops, the rhythm of military marches replaced by the softer rhythm of family life. It is easy to imagine the relief, but it is not without complexity. For even as the people yearn for peace, some fear what peace might bring. Will a France without war still command respect? Will the Emperor lose his aura of invincibility? Will rivals at home, royalists and republicans alike, seize the chance to undermine him? The people's relief is tempered by uncertainty, for they know how quickly fortune can shift. One year they cheer victories, the next they mourn defeats. Perhaps this peace is only an interlude, fragile as a soap bubble, beautiful while it lasts but doomed to burst. Still, the image endures, the rain-soaked streets drying in sunlight, children playing in alleys without fear of soldiers' boots. The tolling of bells, not for funerals, but for weddings. The collective breath of a nation exhaled after years of strain, such is the relief that lingers in the air, waiting for the Emperor's decision. The moment ends with an image, the sound of those bells, distant, imagined, rolling across Paris as though carried by the wind itself. Bells that might have rung in 1813 had the Emperor's hand signed the treaty, bells that echo only in imagination, not in history. Their chimes fade now, leaving us at the threshold of another world, not the streets of Paris, but the camps and palaces where his marshals wait, restless as caged lions, uncertain whether peace will rob them of their purpose. The bells fade into silence, their imagined notes drifting away over the rooftops of Paris, leaving behind not only the relief of the people, but also a deeper unease in the hearts of those who had lived their lives by war. For beyond the city streets, in gilded salons and in the camps where soldiers still drill, Napoleon's marshals wait. They are men shaped by conquest, their names written in dispatches, their fortunes bound to the thunder of cannon. For them, peace is not only a reprieve but also a shadow, for it threatens to erase the very stage upon which their greatness has been built. Murat, flamboyant and reckless, with his mane of hair and his taste for finery, cannot imagine himself confined to ceremonial duties. He has ridden at the head of cavalry charges that shook Europe. He has thundered across plains with sabers flashing. To him, peace feels like exile, a theater without an audience. In his mind, the chimes of those Parisian bells are not a blessing but a warning, telling him that his brilliance will fade in peacetime. He longs for the field, for the roar of hooves, for the chance to carve new glory. Nay, the bravest of the brave bears scars upon his face and soul. His loyalty to Napoleon has never wavered, forged in battles where he stood against impossible odds, yet he too is restless. He cannot sit still in salons or sip wine in gardens. He needs the rhythm of drums, the crack of muskets, the clarity that only battle provides. In peace, he fears becoming just another officer among many, his courage wasted in parades and empty ceremony. When the bells of Paris ring, he hears in them not joy, but the hollow echo of idleness. Soult, meticulous and ambitious, has always balanced the sword with the mind. He has tasted power in Spain, where he ruled as a satrap of empire. For him, peace may offer opportunity of another kind administration, governance, wealth, but even so, he knows that his reputation is bound to victory in the field. Without campaigns, without new lands to administer, he becomes merely a servant of the emperor, not a prince in his own right. And Davout, the Iron Marshal, stern and disciplined, loyal yet uncompromising. He alone, perhaps, could live with peace, for his nature thrives in order, in duty carried out without vanity. But even he would question what peace means when the army's spirit withers. For Davout knows that soldiers who do not fight grow restless, that discipline without purpose becomes brittle. He imagines the army shrinking, his corps disbanded, his men scattered. For him, peace is a danger of another kind, a slow erosion rather than a sudden blow. These marshals and many others form a chorus of ambition, doubt, and loyalty around Napoleon. Their voices may not be heard in the chamber where the Frankfurt Proposal lies, but they weigh upon his mind. He knows that their power rests on him, and his on them. If he signs peace, will they remain loyal, or will they drift away, seeking fresh causes, fresh leaders? If war ends, does their bond fracture, leaving him surrounded by rivals instead of brothers in arms? Consider the army itself. Hundreds of thousands of men drawn from every province of France and beyond. For many, soldiering is not merely duty, but livelihood. They have known nothing else but war, rising through the ranks, finding honor and camaraderie in the march and the campfire. What happens to them when the drums fall silent? Do they return to farms and trades they no longer remember, or do they wander as vagrants, as mercenaries, searching for battles to fight? The marshals know this, and they fear that peace will dissolve the bond that has held the empire together, a bond not of laws or treaties, but of shared struggle. And yet within that fear lies possibility. Suppose Napoleon turns to his marshals and says, "Let us build a different empire, not with swords, but with laws. Let us create schools, roads, institutions that endure longer than battlefields." Could these men, so used to conquest, transform into administrators, governors, mentors? Or would their restless spirits rebel, dragging France back toward war? In history, the answer was never tested. But in our imagining, it lingers as an open door, one that flickers with uncertainty. Imagine Murat, resplendent in peacetime finery, governing Naples with patience rather than fire. Imagine Ney teaching young officers discipline in academies rather than battlefields. Imagine Soult directing trade, canals, and cities instead of armies. Imagine Davout reforming the army into a professional guard that protects rather than conquers. Could it be done? Or is it like asking the eagle to live as a songbird, its wings clipped, its spirit diminished? The marshal's restlessness mirrors Napoleon's own. He is their master and their mirror. For just as they fear obscurity and peace, so does he. Their unease feeds his hesitation, their hunger for glory whispers in his ear even as the people cry for rest. The bells of Paris may toll for joy, but in the barracks the soldiers listen with unease, their muskets stacked in corners, their banners furling in silence. And so we see the shadow of peace. Not only relief, but uncertainty. Not only rest, but restlessness. Peace may soothe the people, but it may also sow discontent among those whose lives are defined by war. If Napoleon accepts the Frankfurt Proposal, he must manage not only the diplomacy of Europe, but the loyalty of his own circle, men who have become powers in their own right. Some may adapt, others may not, and from such tensions, new fractures might emerge, as dangerous as any battle. The final image of this part is not the bells of Paris, but the clatter of swords being sheathed, reluctantly, as though the blades themselves resent their rest. The sound echoes in the halls of the Tuileries, in the camps by the Rhine, in the stables where horses stamp in frustration. It is a sound of uneasy silence, of weapons waiting for a call that may never come. And from that clatter, from those restless hands, we move outward once again, out across the sea, where Britain, ever watchful, ever calculating, listens for the silence of war with suspicion. For if France remains powerful, even in peace, what will Britain make of it? The waves themselves seem to hold their breath, the masts creak in harbors, and the sea waits for its answer. The clatter of swords being sheathed fades like a reluctant echo, the steel still gleaming though hidden from sight. From that echo, the sound becomes the creak of masts in distant harbors, the groan of ropes tightened by the tide, and the slap of waves against the hulls of ships. The scene shifts across the channel, to Britain, where the sea itself is both shield and prison, and where every decision in Europe ripples across the waters to touch the island's fate. Britain has fought Napoleon longer than any other power. It has poured its gold into coalitions, funded armies it did not command, and sustained the struggle with a navy so dominant that the French dared not challenge it head-on. Trafalgar had secured that supremacy, and since then the Royal Navy had ruled the oceans, blockading ports, cutting trade routes, ensuring that Napoleon's empire remained powerful only on land. Yet, the war has cost Britain dearly. Trade is interrupted, taxes high, the national debt swelling, the people endure, but they too are weary. Now, imagine the news arriving in London. Napoleon has accepted the Frankfurt Proposal. Peace, declared not in defeat, but in compromise. At first, there would be relief. The war that seemed endless has at last found a pause. Merchants look to the seas with hope, dreaming of reopened trade. Families who feared their sons would die in Spain or in Flanders breathe easier. Even the government ministers who have spent years calculating every coin would welcome the easing of burdens. And yet, beneath that relief, stirs unease. For what does this peace mean? France remains strong, seated behind its natural frontiers, holding the Rhine, the Alps, the Pyrenees. To British eyes, this is not defeat, but survival. Napoleon remains emperor, his throne secure, his legend intact. Britain's aim, whispered in council rooms for years, has been not merely to check him, but to destroy him, to break the man who threatened to dominate the continent. The Frankfurt Proposal leaves him standing, and in that survival lies danger. The ministers of Britain know well the language of balance. They speak of Europe as a scale that must be carefully weighed, and in their calculation, a France too strong tips the balance against them. The Navy rules the seas, but on the continent, British influence has always depended on allies on Austria, on Prussia, on Russia. If Napoleon remains, how long will those allies remain faithful? Will Austria, satisfied with its borders secure, drift back toward friendship with France? Will Russia, distracted by its vast distances and its own ambitions, grow weary of vigilance? Will Prussia, still weak, be left vulnerable to French pressure? Britain fears isolation, fears a Europe in which France, though diminished, still commands enough power to dominate its neighbors. Consider the docks of Portsmouth, where ships ride at anchor, their cannons silent for the first time in years. The sailors linger on deck, uncertain whether they will soon be discharged. The officers pace, restless, for their careers are built upon command at sea, and peace threatens to strand them ashore. Britain's navy is its pride, but it is also a creature of war. In peace, its size may shrink, its sailors dismissed, its ships left to rot. The admiralty, which thrives on purpose, would look across the water with suspicion, unwilling to trust that Napoleon's empire would truly rest. And what of the army? Though smaller than the continental giants, Britain's army has earned its reputation in Spain, where Wellington has fought campaign after campaign against French marshals. His victories have become legends at home, his name celebrated in Parliament and in the press. Yet if peace comes now, what becomes of Wellington? Will he be remembered as a commander who helped secure a fragile compromise, or will he vanish into the quiet life of estates and titles? For men such as he, peace is both reward and erasure. His soldiers too will disperse, returning to farms, to shops, to obscurity. And though they will be grateful to live, part of them may always wonder what final triumph was denied them. Imagine the debates in Parliament, the air thick with cigar smoke, the benches filled with men who argue over the meaning of this peace. Some cry out in joy, insisting that Britain's purpose is fulfilled, France contained, the seas secure, commerce restored. Others warn darkly that it is but a pause, that Napoleon will rebuild, that the continent will fall once more under his spell. Their words clash, like waves against a seawall, each argument breaking without resolution. In drawing rooms and coffee houses, in the bustling streets of London, ordinary people would feel both relief and suspicion. The war has been part of their lives for so long that its sudden end feels almost unnatural. The ballads sung in taverns, the caricatures of Napoleon sold by printers, the constant reports of battles all vanish into silence. What replaces them? Peace offers comfort, but also uncertainty. Yet Britain has always been a nation of trade, of merchants and ships and distant colonies. Perhaps peace allows its energies to turn outward once more, toward India, toward the Americas, toward the Pacific. Perhaps with Europe quiet, Britain becomes ever more a global empire, its gaze shifting from continental battlefields to the far horizons of the sea. In such a world, the industrial fires of Britain burn hotter, stoked by the wealth of trade, rather than the demands of war. The navy, even if diminished, still ensures that no rival challenges its supremacy on the oceans. And still, in the hearts of ministers and admirals, a question lingers. If Napoleon has survived once more, how long before he rises again? The man has defied defeat time and again, escaping traps, rebuilding armies, turning despair into triumph. Can he truly be trusted to rest within his borders? Or is peace only a mask, a prelude to another storm? Britain's uneasy victory is victory without finality, triumph without closure. Picture the ships rocking gently at anchor, their sails furled, their cannon silent. The sea itself seems calm, but beneath its surface currents swirl, unseen. Britain stands upon the shore, its gaze fixed upon the horizon, its heart torn between relief and suspicion. The wind carries the faint creak of timbers, the murmur of waves. It is the sound of vigilance, of a nation that cannot sleep even when peace is declared. And from this island, unease, from the rocking of ships and the whispers in Parliament, our vision drifts back across the continent, to Vienna. For it is there, in the palaces of Metternich, that the chessboard is laid out, each piece moved with care, each balance measured. Britain may command the seas, but it is Austria that seeks to command the map. And so we leave the creaking harbors, the wary sailors, the restless parliament, and enter the candlelit chambers of Vienna, where peace is not relief but calculation. The candlelight glows upon polished wood, and in the quiet chambers of Vienna the world is rearranged, not with swords but with words. The harbors of Britain may rock with ships, but here the tables groan with maps, colored pins, and sheets of parchment. Prince Metternich stands at the center of it, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes sharp as glass. He is a man who believes that history can be managed, that the chaos of revolution and empire may be tamed by careful balance, as a scale is kept level by weights placed just so. To him, diplomacy is not merely talk, but the art of survival. Imagine him moving across the chamber, pausing before a great map of Europe, pinned to the wall. His fingers hover above the Rhine, the Alps, the Pyrenees. He has offered these frontiers to Napoleon as a gift, or perhaps as a trap. If the emperor accepts, France remains powerful, but contained. If he refuses, then Austria stands ready to join Britain, Russia, and Prussia in pressing war until France is broken. For Metternich, this is not sentiment, but strategy. Austria has bled too often in Napoleon's wars. Its armies have been shattered, its pride humbled. He does not seek conquest now, but survival through equilibrium. The chessboard lies before him, though the pieces are men, nations, armies. Britain is the rook, steady, unyielding, guarding the seas. Russia is the queen, vast and powerful, its reach sweeping across the board, but unpredictable in its moves. Prussia is the knight, battered but still capable of sudden leaps. And France. France remains the king, the piece upon which all depends, slow in movement but commanding the game's fate. Metternich places each in his mind, calculating. If Napoleon signs the Frankfurt Proposal, the game settles into a tense but manageable stalemate. If he refuses, the game erupts into chaos, and no one can predict which pieces will remain standing. In salons across Vienna, diplomats murmur over wine, their voices weaving nets of speculation. They know that peace with Napoleon is dangerous, for it leaves him alive to fight another day. Yet they also know that crushing him entirely may unleash new dangers. Revolution rekindled, France humiliated and vengeful, the continent unstable. Metternich's genius lies in walking this knife edge, in offering peace that is strong enough to tempt Napoleon, yet fragile enough to collapse if rejected. It is diplomacy as a wager, each word a roll of dice, each treaty a move upon the board. Outside the palaces, the people of Austria long for peace no less than the French. The peasants in their fields, the soldiers weary from campaigns, the shopkeepers in Vienna's winding streets, they too are exhausted. But their voices are distant, muffled by the heavy walls of aristocratic chambers. Here, decisions are made not by popular will, but by the quiet calculations of men in silk coats. Metternich listens to no crowd, only to the ticking of his own internal clock, which measures not minutes, but generations. He seeks not victory today, but stability for decades. And yet stability is fragile. Suppose Napoleon accepts the Frankfurt Proposal. Austria secures its safety, its borders intact, its influence preserved. The Holy Roman Empire is gone, but the Austrian throne remains, elevated to the dignity of empire still. In such a peace, Metternich imagines Austria as the fulcrum of Europe, balancing east and west, north and south. He would weave alliances not for conquest, but for containment, a web of treaties designed to hold back both French ambition and Russian expansion. Vienna would become not a battlefield, but a courtroom, where disputes are settled with pens and signatures. But suppose the peace fails, suppose Napoleon refuses, then Austria must commit once more to war, must gamble its soldiers and resources on the hope that this time France can truly be broken. And in that gamble lies fear, for Metternich knows well the might of Napoleon's genius. He knows that France, even wounded, can still strike like a cornered animal. He dreads another Austerlitz, another humiliation that could leave Austria crippled for years to come. This is why he offers peace, why he risks leaving Napoleon upon his throne. For him, it is not weakness but prudence, a recognition that sometimes survival lies, not in destroying the enemy, but in binding him. In our imagining, where Napoleon accepts, Metternich feels both triumph and unease. Triumph, for he has achieved what seemed impossible, the restraint of the French emperor without the ruin of Austria. Unease, for he knows that balance is never permanent, that the scales must always be tended. He imagines conferences, treaties, congresses, perhaps even one day a Grand Council of Europe, where powers meet not to fight but to adjust their disputes. In that vision lies the seed of a future Vienna Congress, born earlier, softer, yet no less ambitious. Picture the chamber in silence as Metternich sets down his pen. Outside, the Danube flows steadily, its waters gleaming in the moonlight. Carriages rattle on cobblestones, carrying messengers to distant courts. In the air hangs the scent of wax and smoke, the weight of decisions unseen by most of Europe's millions, yet shaping all their lives. To Metternich, the world is a chessboard, but to the people beyond these walls, it is simply survival, bread, family, peace. The contrast is stark, yet both realities entwine. And so the image lingers, the chess pieces poised, the board balanced, the hand of the diplomat hovering as surely as Napoleon's quill. Europe itself is caught between moves, between a peace precarious and a war unending. The candles gutter, the map waits, and Metternich paces, his mind alive with strategies that may secure or destroy his empire. From this quiet chamber of calculation, from the chessboard where kings and nations are mere pieces, we drift outward again. Beyond Austria's palaces, across the rivers and forests of Central Europe, lies the German world, a patchwork of kingdoms and duchies, torn between loyalty and resentment, waiting to know whether they will remain fragments or become something more. And so we leave the polished halls of Vienna, stepping into the shadowed valleys of Germany, where the question is not only about France, but about the future of an entire people. From the polished floors of Vienna's palaces, the vision drifts outward, across rivers and forests, into the patchwork of German lands where valleys lie under winter mist, and towns cluster along winding rivers. Here the question is not only about France or Austria, but about identity itself, about whether the scattered duchies, bishoprics, and kingdoms remain fragments of an old order or gather slowly into something new. In 1813, the German world is no nation but a mosaic, its pieces held together by habit, custom, and the pressure of greater powers around it. France to the west, Austria to the south, Prussia to the north, Russia looming from afar, all press upon this central quilt of Europe, and every thread is pulled taut by their rivalry. The Frankfurt Proposal leaves Germany in suspense. If Napoleon accepts, France keeps the Rhine as its frontier, a natural barrier that cuts into the German heartland. For those who live along its banks, the river becomes not a connector, but a wall, dividing families, cultures, economies. To the rulers of states like Bavaria, Württemberg, Saxony, the treaty offers security of sorts. Their thrones, precarious in the storm of war, might be preserved. They had tied their fates to Napoleon through the Confederation of the Rhine, enjoying autonomy under his shadow. If peace comes, they can keep their crowns, their palaces, their small courts with their glittering ceremonies. To them, Napoleon's survival is not a threat, but a guarantee. Yet for others, particularly the patriots of Prussia, peace feels like betrayal. The students who sing of unity in taverns, the officers who drill in frozen courtyards, the writers who dream of a German fatherland, all feel the sting of unfinished struggle. They had hoped that the defeat of Napoleon would bring not only freedom but rebirth, that the German people might rise as one, no longer scattered under dozens of princes. If France remains strong, if the Confederation endures, then their dream is deferred. They must wait, and waiting breeds resentment. Imagine a Prussian officer walking through Berlin, his boots crunching on snow, his thoughts heavy with frustration. He has fought in the wars, seen comrades fall, and believed that their sacrifice would bring a new dawn. Instead, peace arrives with Napoleon still enthroned, his frontier touching the Rhine, his influence stretching into Central Europe. The officer salutes his king, but inwardly wonders, is this the end or merely the pause before another call to arms? He fears that Prussia will remain weak, its spirit smothered under treaties that protect crowns but not nations. And in the lecture halls of German universities, young men whisper by candlelight of liberty, of unity, of destiny. Their professors, steeped in philosophy, speak of Volk, of the spirit of a people, of the yearning for wholeness. In peace, these whispers do not vanish, they grow. For without war to silence them, ideas take root, spreading through pamphlets, songs, poems. The German question becomes not only a political problem, but a cultural storm, one that peace may delay but cannot quell. What of Austria? To Metternich, a Germany fragmented is convenient, for it allows Austria to dominate without rivals. What of Prussia? To its patriots, fragmentation is humiliation, a denial of strength. And what of France? To Napoleon, a divided Germany is a shield, each small state too weak to challenge him alone. In this alternate world, where he signs at Frankfurt, Germany remains fractured, its unification postponed, but history shows us that postponement is not prevention. The desire for unity lingers, simmering beneath the surface, waiting for a spark. Imagine the Rhine itself, its waters flowing between vineyards and castles, between bustling towns and quiet villages. In this peace, it becomes not only a border but a symbol. To the French, it is security, the limit of their natural frontier. To the Germans, it is loss, a river that once bound them, now severing them. Fishermen cast their nets, merchants ferry goods, children play along its banks, but in their songs, in their stories, the Rhine carries another meaning, a reminder that their land is divided, that their people are not whole. And so the German question becomes a ghost, haunting every treaty, every council. Will the princes cling to their thrones? Will the patriots bide their time? Will Austria and Prussia remain rivals or find common cause? In our imagining, Napoleon's acceptance of peace freezes these questions rather than answers them. The Confederation of the Rhine continues, the dream of unity smolders, and Europe moves forward with a Germany still unresolved, yet peace does not erase memory. The students remember Leipzig, the people remember suffering, the officers remember humiliation. These memories, like seeds, will grow in time, watered by frustration, lit by the fires of future crises. The German question lingers, suspended, a possibility deferred, but never extinguished. The final image here is of a river at dusk. The Rhine glimmers under fading light, its current steady in, its surface reflecting the colors of the setting Sunday. On one bank, French soldiers patrol. On the other, German villagers light their hearths. The water flows between them, indifferent to treaties, indifferent to maps. It whispers of unity and of division, of boundaries that exist only because men insist they do. Its sound fades into the night, carrying us onward, away from Germany's restless heart to the Iberian Peninsula, where Spain still smolders from its long ordeal, where guerrillas in the hills wonder what peace with Napoleon truly means. The Rhine fades into darkness, its waters carrying whispers of unity and division, and the vision drifts south, across mountains and plains, into a land where war has burned longest and deepest. Spain, scarred by years of struggle, lies bruised and weary, its villages hollowed, its fields torn by fire. In the hills, guerrillas still move like shadows, their muskets hidden beneath cloaks, their eyes wary, their hearts hardened by endless resistance. The Peninsular War has left wounds that will not easily close, even if Napoleon accepts peace at Frankfurt. Here, the question is not about maps or treaties, but about survival, about whether freedom won at such cost can endure when the empire that once occupied their soil remains powerful just beyond the Pyrenees. Imagine the villages of Castile, where stone churches rise above small squares. The bells ring not in celebration, but in memory, tolling for the dead of past years. Families gather in silence, their tables sparse, their lives marked by absence. Sons gone to the hills to fight, daughters widowed by war, fathers buried in unmarked graves. The people have endured occupation, famine, reprisals, the slow grind of conflict that made their land the graveyard of French ambition. Now they hear rumors of peace, whispers carried by merchants and priests, and they wonder, does this mean the French will never return? Or does it mean only that their shadow remains, waiting for the next march across the mountains? In Madrid, the capital breathes again, but cautiously. The streets, once patrolled by foreign troops, are now watched by Spaniards who have reclaimed their city. Yet the air is heavy with suspicion, for peace imposed by diplomats far away may not erase the memory of French domination. The people remember Joseph Bonaparte, Napoleon's brother, who sat upon their throne as king, a monarch few accepted, a ruler despised as an intruder. They remember the executions in the plazas, the reprisals for uprisings, the cruelty of an occupying army. For them, peace signed in Frankfurt is not forgiveness. It is only a pause, and wounds of memory are slower to heal than scars of battle. And what of the guerrillas themselves? These men and women, peasants turned fighters, hunters turned soldiers, priests who blessed weapons before ambushes, farmers who struck in darkness and vanished at dawn, they have built their lives around resistance. If the war ends, will they lay down their muskets and return to their fields, or will they remain restless, unable to live in a world where their struggle has lost its purpose? Peace is fragile because it asks warriors to become farmers again, to silence the rage that has defined them. Some may succeed, others may not. For Spain's monarchy, restored under Ferdinand VII, peace is a double-edged gift. On one hand, it returns him to power, his throne secure against Napoleon's ambitions. On the other, it leaves him a king over a broken land, his people suspicious, his economy shattered, his authority fragile. The temptation will be to rule harshly, to crush dissent, to assert his power in the name of order. Yet such severity risks reigniting the spirit of rebellion. Spain may be free of French soldiers, but its own divisions between monarchists and liberals, between absolutists and reformers remain. Peace with France cannot heal these fractures, it only exposes them. Picture the Spanish countryside at dusk, the hills glowing in the last light, the olive groves whispering in the wind. Along dusty roads, villagers carry baskets, soldiers limp homeward, monks chant prayers in cloisters. The land longs for peace, yet peace itself feels uncertain, fragile as a bird's wing. The French may be gone, but their shadow lingers, and across the mountains the empire still stands, its armies rested, its emperor alive. Spain is free, but it is the freedom of a house rebuilt after fire, its beams scorched, its walls weakened. The structure stands, but every creak reminds its people how easily it could collapse again. And in our imagining, where Napoleon accepts peace, Spain's role in Europe shifts. No longer the battlefield of empires, it becomes a scarred land on the margin, cautious, watchful, suspicious of every French move. Its wounds may push it inward, consumed by internal struggles between crown and reformers, church and liberals. Or perhaps, in time, the memory of resistance fuels a new strength, a pride that forges unity stronger than before. For nations too can heal, though slowly. And the memory of survival against overwhelming odds can inspire generations. But in the fragile moment of 1813, nothing is certain. Spain is free, yet freedom is a trembling flame, threatened by the winds of both foreign ambition and domestic strife. The bells of its churches ring in the night, their tones rising over ruined villages and quiet fields. They ring for the dead, but also for the living, calling them to endure, to rebuild, to believe that the long nightmare is ending. The sound of those bells drifts outward, carried on the mountain winds, across the snowy passes of the Pyrenees, across the plains beyond. It mingles with another sound far to the east, softer but no less insistent, the muffled fall of snowflakes over Russia's empty fields, where the memory of Moscow's burning still haunts the mind of a czar who waits to decide whether peace is truly enough. The bells of Spain drift away, their echoes dissolving into mountain winds, and the vision turns eastward, where snow falls quietly across vast plains. Here lies Russia, endless and cold, a land that has swallowed armies whole. The silence is not gentle but immense, a silence heavy with memory, for in these fields Napoleon's grand army once marched, and in these same fields it died. Moscow, burned in its own defense, still smolders in the mind of its people. For them, the war has never been merely political, it has been spiritual, a test of endurance, a crucible of faith. At the heart of this frozen empire sits Tsar Alexander I, a man both mystic and monarch, torn between visions of destiny and the burdens of power. He remembers the terrible retreat of 1812, the endless columns of French soldiers staggering through snow, the bodies frozen along the road like statues of despair. He remembers the night skies lit by Moscow's flames, the city sacrificed so that Russia might live. In those memories he sees divine providence, a judgment passed upon Napoleon. To Alexander, the French emperor is not simply a rival but an instrument of punishment, a scourge against which Europe must unite. Now the envoys speak of peace, of Napoleon's acceptance of the Frankfurt Proposal. France contained, but France still strong. The Rhine as its shield, the Alps as its fortress, the Pyrenees as its southern wall. To Austria, this is balance. To Britain it is unease. To Russia it is something more complicated. For Alexander, peace with Napoleon is not merely politics. It is a question of faith. Can a man who once brought fire to Moscow be allowed to reign in dignity? Can an emperor who defied the Tsar's god now be trusted as neighbor? Picture the halls of St. Petersburg, the chandeliers glittering, the courtiers whispering behind gloved hands. The Tsar moves among them like a restless spirit, his gaze distant, his words laced with prophecy. He speaks of holy alliances, of Europe bound not only by treaties but by divine mission, a fellowship of monarchs guarding against the specter of revolution. To him, Napoleon embodies that specter, a usurper who crowned himself, a man who rose from chaos to rule by ambition. If peace is made, does it not sanctify the very spirit Alexander seeks to banish? And yet, even a mystic must reckon with reality. Russia is vast, but it is weary. Its soldiers are exhausted, its economy strained, its people burdened by years of war. The nobility, though loyal, murmur for stability, for time to rebuild estates, for respite from endless campaigns. The peasants, bound to the land, endure quietly, but they too feel the toll. Winter bites, harvests fail, famine threatens. In such a moment, peace may seem not betrayal, but necessity. Alexander's vision may burn bright, but the needs of his empire demand pause, so the Tsar hesitates, caught between vengeance and prudence. If Napoleon signs, Alexander may accept peace outwardly, while inwardly nursing the fire of destiny. He may bide his time, building alliances, dreaming of a day when the usurper is toppled not by treaty, but by divine retribution. Or perhaps, in this alternate world, he allows himself to see the compromise as providence itself, a chance to secure Russia's borders while still claiming the moral high ground. For a man of visions, peace may be reframed as part of God's plan, a step on the long road to salvation. Consider the soldiers who march through Russian villages, their boots caked with ice, their coats threadbare. They have buried comrades in snow, faced hunger that gnawed at their very bones, seen whole regiments dissolve into silence. For them, peace is no philosophical dilemma. It is warmth, bread, survival. If Napoleon remains behind the Rhine, they may never have to march west again. They may return to their homes, to families who feared them lost. The relief is simple, physical, human. And yet, in their songs, in their prayers, the memory of Moscow will always burn. They will never forget. Imagine the vast landscape at twilight, the horizon unbroken, the snow stretching like an ocean. A wolf howls in the distance, its cry lonely yet fierce. Such is Russia itself, vast, haunted, resilient. Napoleon's survival may bring calm, but it will not erase the hunger for justice that lingers in Alexander's heart. The Tsar sees himself as guardian of a sacred trust, and even if peace binds his hands, his soul remains restless. He dreams of a Europe redeemed, of a France humbled, of a world purified by faith and monarchy. And so, in this alternate path, Russia accepts the treaty but does not embrace it. The Tsar's signature lies upon paper, but his eyes remain fixed upon the horizon, waiting for signs of destiny. He may smile in salons, speak gracious words to envoys, but beneath his courtesy lies steel, a conviction that history is not yet finished. Peace is tolerated, not celebrated. It is a pause in the storm, not its end. The final image is of snow falling over Moscow's blackened ruins, the silence broken only by the faint crackle of embers that never truly die. Russia accepts peace, but in its heart the fire smolders still, waiting for the wind to rise. The snow muffles the sound, but beneath it one can almost hear the echo of drums, distant, inevitable. From this frozen expanse, the vision drifts southward once more, toward the edge of Europe, where another empire, older and more fragile than France, clings to survival by the waters of the Bosphorus. The Ottoman question rises, its fate uncertain in a world where Napoleon still stands, and peace reshapes the map in ways no sultan can ignore. The snow falls over Moscow's ruins, silent and cold, but the vision drifts southward, where the air grows softer and the land changes its voice. Across mountains and rivers, past the Danube's winding path, the waters of the Bosphorus glimmer in the moonlight. Minarets pierce the sky, their slender forms rising above domes and rooftops, while the call to prayer drifts across the city, carried on salt winds from the sea. Here lies Constantinople, heart of the Ottoman Empire, an empire ancient in memory yet fragile in its present, a land of crossroads where Europe and Asia meet in uneasy embrace. For centuries, the Ottoman state had been the great rival of Christendom, its armies advancing deep into Europe, its banners feared from Vienna to the Mediterranean, but by 1813, the empire is no longer a conqueror but a survivor, clinging to territory against the pressures of both East and West. Its provinces strain with rebellion, its armies are outdated, its finances weak. The sultans rule still, their palaces glittering with ceremony, but their power flickers like a lamp threatened by the wind. And in this moment, when Napoleon's choice at Frankfurt reshapes the map of Europe, the question arises, what of the Ottomans, this empire that watches but cannot steer the storm? Imagine the divan, the council chamber where advisors whisper beneath gilded ceilings. The news of Napoleon's acceptance of peace has reached them. France remains strong, contained within natural frontiers but alive, its emperor unbroken. Austria sighs with relief. Britain debates, Russia hesitates. For the Ottomans, the meaning is less clear. On one hand, a stable France means fewer disruptions in the Balkans, fewer chances for Austrian or Russian power to expand under the excuse of war. On the other, it means that the great powers remain united in vigilance, their eyes always searching for weakness. And the Ottoman Empire, weakened and exposed, offers plenty. Picture the Balkans, a patchwork of peoples and faiths, Serbs, Greeks, Bulgarians, Albanians, each carrying their own grievances, their own dreams of freedom. For years, they have looked to Russia as protector, to France as inspiration, to Britain as a distant ally. If peace reigns in the West, will these ambitions be suppressed, or will they grow louder now that the great armies no longer march across Central Europe? The empire fears that a quiet Europe means sharper focus on its own fragility, that without the distraction of Napoleon's wars, the powers will turn their attention toward the Bosphorus, toward the sick man whose decline they already whisper about. And yet, there is another possibility. Suppose Napoleon, now bound within his borders, seeks influence not by conquest, but by diplomacy. Suppose he extends his hand once more to the Ottoman court, renewing the old friendship forged during his Egyptian campaign. A France at peace in Europe may still look eastward, offering protection, trade, and counsel. The Ottomans, wary of Russian ambition and Austrian designs, might welcome such support. In this alternate path, the empire may gain a reprieve, shielded by the shadow of France's survival. Imagine the city of Constantinople. At dusk, the Bosphorus reflects the glow of lanterns. Fishermen call out across the water. Markets close with the scent of spices lingering in the air. In the courtyards of Topkapi Palace, the Sultan walks in silence, listening to the reports of advisors. He hears of French peace, of Austrian satisfaction, of Russian hesitation. He wonders what it means for his own domains, stretched thin from Anatolia to the Balkans. He knows his armies cannot withstand the great powers. He knows his throne rests on fragile foundations. But perhaps, in this fragile peace, there lies opportunity to reform, to rebuild, to seek allies before the next storm arrives. The people of the empire, from peasants in Anatolian villages to merchants in Smyrna, from fishermen on the Aegean coast to shepherds in the Balkans, do not speak of diplomacy. They speak of harvests, of taxes, of the daily weight of survival. Yet they too feel the tremor of Europe's decisions, though distant. A peaceful France may mean fewer foreign armies moving near their lands, fewer disruptions of trade routes, more stability for markets. But peace does not erase the empire's deeper troubles: corruption, inefficiency, rebellion. These remain like cracks in an old wall, widening with time. And what of Russia? The Tsar's eyes are never far from the Bosphorus. To Alexander, protector of orthodoxy, the lands under Ottoman rule are both sacred mission and political ambition. If Napoleon survives, Russia may bide its time, but in the long run, the empire's weakness tempts. Austria, too, eyes the Balkans, fearing Russian dominance but eager to expand its own. Britain, ever focused on trade routes, watches the eastern Mediterranean, wary of any rival who might threaten the road to India. The Ottoman Empire stands at the crossroads of their ambitions, its fate tied not to its own strength but to the rivalries of others. In our imagining, where peace holds after Frankfurt, the Ottomans are granted a pause, a breathing space. The great powers, satisfied with Napoleon contained, may delay their schemes. Reformers within the empire might use this time to modernize the army, to strengthen administration, to resist decline. But just as likely, the pause is squandered, the empire drifting onward while its neighbors prepare. Peace is fragile, opportunity fleeting. The question is not whether the Ottomans will be challenged, but when. The final image is of waves lapping against the walls of Constantinople, their rhythm steady, eternal. Ships pass through the Bosphorus, carrying goods, soldiers, rumors. The city glows with lamps, its skyline magnificent, its future uncertain. Peace in the West does not erase its troubles, it only delays the hour when the empire must face them. The waters shimmer, reflecting stars above, as if the heavens themselves watch silently, knowing that the Ottoman question cannot remain unanswered forever. And from these waters, the vision expands outward once more, across the wide Atlantic, where another world is stirring. For while Europe negotiates peace, the Americas whisper of liberty, of revolution, of independence. The winds of change blow not only over Paris and Vienna, but across oceans, where colonies dream of breaking free and empires struggle to hold them. The story now carries us westward, to the Americas, where the fate of Napoleon's choice ripples far beyond Europe's shores. The waters of the Bosphorus shimmer with starlight, their waves steady and unhurried, but the vision drifts westward, carried by currents that flow through the Mediterranean, past Gibraltar's rocky gate, and out into the wide Atlantic. There the sea becomes vast and restless, its waves driven by winds that cross thousands of miles to the shores of the Americas. In these lands, far from the palaces of Europe, the decisions of emperors still echo, shaping lives, igniting dreams, and fanning the flames of liberty. For here, too, the question of Napoleon's acceptance of the Frankfurt Proposal carries weight, not in treaties signed in candlelit chambers, but in revolutions whispered in plazas, in plantations, in assembly halls. Consider Latin America, where colonies under Spanish and Portuguese crowns are already stirring with rebellion. The wars in Europe have weakened the hand of the mother countries, distracted kings and courts, drained resources. In Caracas, Buenos Aires, Mexico City, whispers of independence spread. Leaders like Simón Bolívar dream of liberation, inspired not only by Enlightenment ideals but also by the chaos of Europe. If Napoleon accepts peace, Spain may steady itself, turning attention back across the ocean, seeking to reclaim control with fresh vigor. The fragile struggles of independence might falter under renewed pressure. Or perhaps, the exhaustion of Spain, scarred by years of occupation, ensures that its grasp remains weak no matter what Europe decides. Peace in Europe may delay the revolutions, but it may also allow them to grow deeper, more organized, less chaotic. In Haiti, the first Black Republic, born from fire and defiance, independence had already been won, a symbol to all enslaved peoples. Napoleon's survival at Frankfurt does not erase this triumph, but it may alter how it is remembered. Perhaps a France still strong, though contained, becomes less able to interfere in the Caribbean, leaving Haiti to consolidate its sovereignty. Or perhaps the presence of Napoleon, still emperor, sharpens old fears among European monarchies, making them more determined to isolate Haiti fearing the spread of its example. The drumbeat of freedom echoes nonetheless, a rhythm that no treaty can silence. And what of the United States? In 1813 it is still young, its borders uncertain, its politics fragile. The War of 1812 rages with Britain, and the shadow of European conflict hangs over its ambitions. If Napoleon accepts peace, Britain may focus more attention on the American War, pressing harder against the Republic. The young nation might suffer greater strain, its expansion slowed, its confidence shaken. Or perhaps peace in Europe frees Britain to negotiate more readily, weary of conflict on two fronts. The United States may find its destiny altered subtly, its rise delayed or accelerated depending on the tides of distant decisions. Imagine a port in Havana where merchants load ships with sugar, tobacco, and coffee. They speak of rumors carried across the sea that Napoleon has made peace, that Europe may rest. To them, this means not ideology, but commerce. Peace might reopen markets, allow goods to flow, stabilize prices. Yet beneath the hum of trade lies unease. For in every cargo hold, in every dockside tavern, the whispers of freedom travel too. The more ships sail, the faster ideas spread, and ideas, once loosed, cannot be bound again. In the highlands of Mexico, a priest-turned-rebel rallies villagers with cries of liberty. He draws not from treaties or kings, but from the hunger of the people, their longing for dignity. Does Napoleon's survival matter here? Perhaps only indirectly. If Spain regains strength through peace, the rebellion may be crushed more swiftly. If Spain remains weak despite peace, the rebellion may grow into a nation. History bends in small ways. The great decisions of emperors filtering into the lives of peasants who may never hear their names, but who feel their weight nonetheless. And across Brazil, under Portuguese rule, the court itself has fled to Rio de Janeiro, exiled by Napoleon's armies. With peace at Frankfurt, does the royal family return to Lisbon sooner, restoring Portugal's control? Or does the strange experiment of a European monarchy ruling from the New World continue, planting seeds of independence in Brazil's soil? In our imagining, the map shifts subtly. Borders may be drawn differently, timelines altered. Independence may come later or sooner, shaped by whether Napoleon's survival strengthens or weakens old crowns. Picture the Atlantic itself, restless under the moon. Ships cut across its surface, sails full, holds heavy with goods and passengers. On board, sailors whisper of revolutions. Merchants speak of markets. Soldiers dream of home. The sea carries not only cargo, but ideas, and those ideas spread like sparks, leaping from port to port. Peace in Europe may calm the cannons, but it cannot silence the whispers of liberty that the ocean bears. The Americas, in this alternate world, remain a theater of possibility. Independence may falter, or it may flourish. Trade may strengthen empires, or it may fuel rebellion. The balance of Europe shifts across the ocean, shaping the destiny of continents far removed from Frankfurt's candlelit chambers. The choice Napoleon makes ripples outward, unseen but powerful, altering the rhythm of liberty's march. The final image is of waves pounding against the shore of a Caribbean island. The sound is steady, insistent, eternal, like the heartbeat of the New World itself. The waves carry with them both chains and freedom, both empire and independence. They crash and retreat, each cycle carrying whispers of change. And from that oceanic rhythm, the vision turns once more back to Europe, where another rhythm is beginning to stir, not of waves, but of hammers striking metal, of wheels turning, of furnaces glowing. The question now becomes, in a Europe granted peace, how would industry itself be shaped? The waves crash upon Caribbean shores, retreat, and crash again, but as the sound fades, it is replaced by another rhythm duller, heavier, more insistent. The clang of hammers on anvils, the creak of wooden wheels turning, the hiss of steam beginning to find its voice. In Europe, far from the plantations and revolutions of the Americas, another transformation gathers strength: industry. Even as diplomats shuffle maps and emperors weigh treaties, furnaces are being stoked, looms set in motion, engines tested in fields. The Industrial Revolution, that quiet force which will in time alter the world more profoundly than any battlefield, is already stirring. And so the question arises, what if Napoleon had accepted the Frankfurt Proposal, granting Europe peace? How might this peace have shaped the rhythm of industry, the fire of invention, the destiny of labor and machine? Imagine the streets of Manchester, already thick with smoke, where factories rise like fortresses and chimneys pierce the gray sky. Children dart through alleys, carrying spools of thread, their hands raw from labor. Men and women bend over machines, their movements mechanical, their lives measured in hours of toil. The war has strained Britain, but also driven its industry, for cannons, uniforms, and ships require endless production. If peace comes in 1813, the war demand diminishes. Does industry slow, its growth tempered by rest? Or does peace open new markets, new possibilities for trade, fueling expansion rather than limiting it? The balance is delicate. For France, the question is sharper still. Napoleon's empire has been built on war, its resources drained into campaigns. Yet France, too, has engineers, inventors, scholars hungry to transform ideas into machines. If peace holds, might France catch its breath, invest in factories, schools, roads? Could a smaller but secure empire channel its energy into creation rather than conquest, building a modern economy instead of a military one? In this alternate world, perhaps the image of France in the 19th century is not only of soldiers in uniform, but of workers in foundries, scientists in laboratories, entrepreneurs in workshops. Picture a blacksmith's forge in a small French town. In wartime, he hammers out horseshoes for cavalry, repairs bayonets, sharpens sabers. In peace, his forge may turn to other tasks: plowshares, gears, tools for artisans. The rhythm of his hammer changes, but it continues, and with it grows the possibility of a different kind of strength. An empire measured not only in victories but in inventions. And across Europe, from Belgium to Saxony, from northern Italy to the Low Countries, small workshops hum with activity. Weavers test new machines, chemists experiment with dyes, miners dig deeper into coal seams. War has disrupted much, but it has also spread knowledge. Armies moving across borders carry not only muskets, but ideas, innovations, glimpses of technologies. In peace, these seeds may take root faster. Without the constant upheaval of campaigns, the industrial fire may burn more steadily, spreading sooner, altering the timing of history. Yet peace may also bring caution. Governments relieved of military urgency may hesitate to invest in risky innovations. The urgency that war imposes, the demand for faster guns, stronger ships, better logistics may be absent. Without it, does invention slow? Does progress wait for another spur, another crisis? The question lingers, unanswered, as we imagine workshops glowing in twilight, their forges bright but uncertain in their promise. Consider the railways, that symbol of the century to come. In our history, they spread quickly after the wars, stitching nations together with iron. But in a Europe where Napoleon survives within his borders, where monarchies remain watchful but cautious, might railways spread differently? Perhaps slower, if governments fear that too much connection stirs unrest, or perhaps faster, if peace opens trade routes and merchants demand speed. A single treaty signed in Frankfurt may ripple into the very timetables of trains decades later. And what of the workers themselves? In peace, they return from armies to fields and factories. Their skills, once honed for war, are redirected toward craft and labor. Some become mechanics, engineers, inventors. Others swell the ranks of laborers whose conditions worsen as industry grows. Without war to distract governments, perhaps unrest emerges sooner. Strikes, protests, demands for rights. The century of revolutions may still arrive, but in new shapes, shaped by industry rather than by battlefield. Imagine the sound of a loom in Lyon, its shuttles clattering like rain on a roof. Imagine coal mines in Belgium, the rumble of carts pulled by ponies underground. Imagine canals dug through the Low Countries, water lapping against stone. These are not the sounds of war, yet they are no less transformative. They are the pulse of a new world being born, one that peace might accelerate or delay, one that no emperor can fully control. Napoleon himself, in this alternate path, might turn his restless energy towards such projects. He had always valued order, administration, infrastructure. His roads, his codes, his schools testify to that. If war ends in 1813, might he devote his genius to fostering science and industry? Might France, under his guidance, compete with Britain not on battlefields but in workshops and factories? One can imagine him inspecting machines, listening to inventors, commanding resources with the same urgency he once commanded troops. His empire, smaller but more stable, might become a crucible for innovation. Or perhaps his spirit, forged in war, could never adjust, leaving such matters to lesser men while he brooded over lost conquests. The industrial fire glows regardless. Peace cannot smother it. War cannot claim it fully. It burns in furnaces, in laboratories, in the minds of workers and thinkers. But the shape it takes, the speed of its spread, the lives it transforms, these may all shift in a Europe where the Frankfurt Proposal was signed. The question is not whether the fire burns, but how brightly, and in whose hearth it glows most fiercely. The final image is of a forge at night. The blacksmith pauses, his hammer resting, his face lit red by the glow of coals. Outside, the world is quiet. No drums of war, no marching boots, only the steady hiss of fire and the soft beat of his heart. He breathes, and the forge breathes with him, its embers alive, its promise unspoken. From this quiet glow, the vision rises once more, back into palaces and courts, where monarchs ponder not industry but legitimacy, not machines but crowns. The industrial fire burns beneath them, unseen, while they debate whether peace with Napoleon means safety or only delay. The blacksmith's forge fades, its glow dimming against the night, and the vision drifts upward into palaces where chandeliers shine, where velvet curtains stir in draughts, and where kings sit upon gilded thrones. While the hammer of industry rings quietly in workshops, here the question is different. What becomes of monarchy itself, in a Europe where Napoleon accepts peace? For the crowned heads of the continent, the treaty at Frankfurt would not only redraw maps but also test legitimacy, that fragile thread binding thrones to their peoples. Imagine the court of Vienna, where Emperor Francis of Austria presides over traditions centuries old. He sighs with relief at Napoleon's acceptance, for his empire is spared another round of ruinous battles. Yet deep within him lies unease. For though France is contained, its emperor remains, a man who crowned himself without pope or ancient lineage, a man who rose from revolution to become sovereign. The very existence of Napoleon unsettles monarchs, for he proves that crowns can be seized, not merely inherited. Peace may quiet cannons, but it cannot silence that example. In Berlin, King Frederick William of Prussia faces a similar paradox. His realm, humiliated in past wars, longs for revival, yet he knows his throne rests upon the consent of greater powers. Napoleon's survival confirms that the tide of history can be defied, that legitimacy may be rewritten. To his subjects, Napoleon is both enemy and inspiration. Enemy for occupying their land, inspiration for showing that a man of ambition can remake destiny. For a king born to rule, such inspiration is dangerous. In London, King George sits secure upon an island throne, his monarchy protected by parliament, by navy, by distance. Yet even here the shadow falls. For if Napoleon remains emperor, Britain's claim to be the defender of old order feels less certain. They may celebrate peace, but the image of the Corsican upstart, still reigning across the channel, gnaws at their pride. To them, the monarchy's victory feels incomplete, like a battle paused before its final blow. And in St. Petersburg, Alexander imagines his divine mission, his holy alliance of kings united against revolution. Yet how can such an alliance exist, while Napoleon, the living symbol of revolution's triumph, continues to wear his crown? For Alexander, the dilemma is sharper than for any other monarch. Peace demands he accept what his faith denies. The paradox deepens. To destroy Napoleon is to risk unleashing chaos in France again, a republic revived, revolution reborn, ideas spreading like wildfire. To preserve him, contained within strong frontiers, is to allow a living contradiction, an emperor without divine right, a sovereign born of gunpowder and ambition, not blood and sanctity. Which danger is greater? Which poison less deadly? This is the monarchy's dilemma, a choice between chaos and contradiction, between past and future. Picture the salons of Europe's courts, where courtiers whisper behind fans, where ambassadors exchange cautious glances. They speak of stability, of the need for peace, but their voices tremble with uncertainty, for they know their thrones rest upon faith as much as armies, and faith is fragile when one man has shattered all tradition and yet still reigns. Napoleon at Frankfurt may sign peace, but in every palace he remains a reminder that crowns can be remade. And what of France itself? The people may breathe relief, the marshals may grumble, the diplomats may calculate. But for monarchies abroad, the greatest unease lies in the possibility that France's experiment endures. A people who once executed their king now live under an emperor of their own making. If that can endure, what stops others from dreaming the same? The monarchies fear that peace does not end revolution but normalizes it, that by allowing Napoleon to survive, they allow the seed of rebellion to grow within their own realms. Imagine the face of a young student in Vienna, listening to professors whisper of liberty. Imagine a Russian officer, disillusioned with autocracy, reading pamphlets smuggled across borders. Imagine a British radical, inspired by France's endurance, calling for reforms at home. These faces are unseen by kings, but they are the true threat, the quiet revolution born not of cannon fire but of example. Peace preserves Napoleon's throne, but in doing so it preserves the possibility of change in every heart that watches. And yet, there is another layer. Perhaps the monarchies, relieved of war, adapt more swiftly. Perhaps they reform their administrations, strengthen their armies, invest in industry. Perhaps the presence of Napoleon, alive but contained, pushes them to modernize without collapsing. In such a world, Europe may move toward cautious reform rather than violent revolution, toward adaptation rather than collapse. The dilemma cuts both ways, for fear of Napoleon may spur as much renewal as it does unrest. Picture the palaces once more. In Vienna, in Berlin, in St. Petersburg, in London. Their chandeliers glitter, their ballrooms echo with music, their halls resound with footsteps of courtiers. Yet in each, behind the gilded walls, lies a draft that stirs the curtains, a reminder that no fortress is entirely sealed. Peace has come, but it has not settled the monarchs' hearts. They smile in portraits, but their eyes betray anxiety. For in every shadow they see the silhouette of Napoleon, smaller now but still defiant, still enthroned. The final image is of a long corridor in a palace. At its far end, a curtain shifts in the breeze, though the window is closed. The draft is invisible, unexplained, yet it moves the fabric gently, persistently. So it is with Napoleon's survival in this alternate peace. Unseen yet felt, subtle yet unsettling. The monarchy's dilemma is not solved, only suspended. And from that corridor, the vision turns back to France itself, to the emperor at its center. For the monarchs may brood, but the greater question remains, what of Napoleon himself? In a Europe reshaped by peace, does he remain the eternal soldier, or can he transform into something new? Can he trade battlefields for courtrooms, sabers for statutes? The question beckons us inward again, into the heart of the man who holds destiny in his restless hands. The corridor fades, the curtain drifting in its unexplained draft, and the vision returns to Paris, where the emperor himself sits once more at the center of possibility. Napoleon, the soldier, the conqueror, the gambler of destiny, what becomes of him in a world where he accepts the Frankfurt Proposal, where his empire is trimmed but preserved, where cannons fall silent, and the drumbeat of war fades into memory? Can he, who has built his life upon campaigns and victories, transform into something else? A statesman? A reformer? A builder of peace? Imagine him in the Tuileries Palace, not bent over maps of Europe's battlefields, but over plans for roads, for schools, for trade routes. He had always possessed an eye for detail, a passion for administration. Even amidst his campaigns, he created the Napoleonic Code, reorganized education, centralized government. He believed in merit, in order, in clarity. War had consumed his energy, but peace might channel it into construction rather than conquest. In this alternate world, he might spend his mornings listening not to dispatches from the front, but to reports from ministers of commerce, agriculture, and science. Consider his relationship with the French people. They had followed him because he brought glory, because he defended them against coalitions of monarchies, because he promised stability after revolution's chaos. But by 1813, their patience had thinned. They longed for rest, for bread, for fathers and sons at home. If Napoleon accepts peace, he grants them what they most desire. In return, their loyalty may deepen, not the fevered loyalty of soldiers, but the quieter, steadier loyalty of citizens, who see in him not only a conqueror, but a ruler who knows when to stop. The legend of Napoleon might become not a story of ruin, but of restraint, a tale of the general who became lawgiver. Picture the countryside, where peasants plow fields without fear of conscription. Picture towns where veterans open shops, where widows no longer bury the fallen, where children grow in homes not shadowed by war. Napoleon, in this imagining, walks among them, not as the distant emperor, but as the ruler who gave them peace. His speeches shift from glory to prosperity, from battles won to lives preserved. The people cheer, not with the wild ecstasy of conquest, but with the steady gratitude of survival. And in Paris, imagine the hum of reform. Schools filled with children learning science, history, law. Universities strengthened, libraries expanded, canals dug, bridges built, engineers test machines, chemists discover compounds, merchants thrive in open markets. Napoleon, restless as ever, channels his energy into oversight, into driving his ministers forward. He inspects schools with the same sharp gaze he once cast across regiments, demands punctuality from bureaucrats as he once demanded courage from soldiers. In this alternate path, the empire becomes not only a military state but a civil one, its strength measured in laws and infrastructure. Yet, can the soldier in him truly rest? That is the question. For Napoleon was never content with half measures. He lived in motion, his mind leaping from one challenge to the next. Peace may bore him, gnaw at him, tempt him toward new adventures. Perhaps he looks across the Mediterranean, thinking of Egypt once more, of trade routes, of colonies. Perhaps he turns to diplomacy, weaving alliances with the same vigor he once waged campaigns. Perhaps he dreams of transforming Europe not by force, but by influence, positioning France as the leader of a new continental order. There is precedent. He admired Roman emperors not only as conquerors, but as builders, men who erected aqueducts, codified laws, raised cities that endured long after legions marched. In peace he might seek to emulate them, to leave behind monuments of stone and institutions of governance. He might even seek to reconcile with monarchs, presenting himself not as their enemy, but as their equal, an emperor among emperors. Could Metternich's vision of balance endure if Napoleon himself embraced it? Could the man who once defied all order now become its guardian? And yet, shadows remain. His marshals, restless without war, may press for new campaigns. His enemies, suspicious of his every move, may doubt his sincerity. At home, royalists may plot, republicans may whisper, both waiting for him to stumble. The peace he grants may steady France, but it may also entangle him in new challenges, subtler but no less perilous than battlefields. In this world, Napoleon's survival depends not only on his will, but on his ability to reinvent himself, to accept that his sword must rest and his pen must rule. Picture a classroom in a small French town. The children sit at wooden desks, their slates scratched with chalk, their eyes lifted toward a teacher who speaks of history, of mathematics, of law. Outside the window, the fields stretch quiet, untouched by armies. The bell rings, its sound carrying across rooftops. This is Napoleon's France in peace, a nation that builds rather than burns, that teaches rather than conquers. The emperor may not march in person to every village, but his presence is felt in the codes, the schools, the roads. He becomes not only a figure of war, but of daily life. In such a world, the 19th century itself shifts. France does not collapse into monarchy restored, nor does it return to republican chaos. It endures as empire, smaller but steadier, its institutions strengthened, its emperor reimagined. The legend of Napoleon may be different, less romantic perhaps, less tragic, but more enduring. He becomes not the fallen titan of St. Helena, but the architect of a France that survived and adapted. The final image is of Napoleon himself, not in uniform but in plain clothes, walking slowly through a garden in Paris. The trees rise above him, their branches bare in winter but waiting for spring. He pauses to watch children at play nearby, their laughter carrying in the air. He does not smile often, but in this moment perhaps he does. For in this imagining, his empire rests, his people endure, and his legacy is not only of war but of peace. And from this garden, from the vision of an emperor-turned-statesman, the story moves outward again not to rulers or armies, but to the countless individuals whose lives might have been spared. For the measure of this alternate world is not only in borders and laws, but in lives unlost, in futures unbroken, in footsteps that might have walked paths never taken. The garden fades into silence, the bare branches waiting for spring, and the image turns outward from the emperor to the countless souls beyond him. 4. If Napoleon accepts the Frankfurt Proposal, the true measure of change is not only in treaties or laws, but in lives themselves, lives unbroken, lives spared, lives that history in its reality did not allow. To imagine this alternate world is to walk through a landscape of possibility, to hear the footsteps of the living who, in another history, would have fallen. Picture a village in Normandy, where the church bell tolls not for funerals, but for weddings. In our history, many of its young men marched eastward, never to return, their names carved on memorials long after, but in this imagining, they remain. They walk the fields in spring, laughing as they guide oxen through furrows. They dance at harvest festivals, they court sweethearts by lantern light, they grow old with children at their knees. Their lives, so ordinary, become extraordinary in their persistence, in their simple refusal to be lost. And in Paris, a widow sits by her window, her candle unlit. In one history, she lost her husband at Leipzig, her son conscripted and buried in foreign soil. But in this history, he comes home. He walks through the doorway, weary but alive, his uniform folded away, his hands ready for carpentry, for craft, for the building of life rather than its destruction. She smiles, and the candle she never lit is no longer needed, for the room glows with his presence. In Spain, where guerrillas haunt the hills, a boy grows to manhood without learning the art of ambush. He becomes a shepherd, guiding flocks, singing to them as his father once did. In another history, he would have died in reprisal, shot against a village wall. Here he lives. His children will hear his songs, not his silence. In Prussia, a student at a university writes poems instead of marching. His verses speak of love, of rivers, of the longing for unity, but not of war. He sends them to a young woman, who reads them with tears in her eyes. In another world, he would have perished in a skirmish, his pen silenced. Here, he becomes a professor, teaching generations. His words ripple outward, shaping minds instead of vanishing with his breath. And in Russia, a soldier limps home from the campaign, not broken but whole. He kisses his wife, lifts his child, and sets about tending his land. He tells no stories of frozen retreats, no nightmares of comrades left behind. Instead, his life is quiet, unmarked by history, but precious in its wholeness. These lives are not grand. They are not the names inscribed in books or honored in statues. They are bakers and teachers, farmers and shoemakers, mothers and children. Yet together they form the true weight of history. For every war lost means thousands of lives unlived, thousands of stories ended before their time. In this imagining, those stories continue. The tapestry of life grows richer, more colorful, more complete. And what of art? Of music? Of thought? How many voices were silenced by cannon fire? How many ideas buried with their authors? In this alternate world, perhaps a composer who would have perished in war lives to write symphonies. Perhaps a painter, spared from conscription, creates works that fill galleries with light. Perhaps a philosopher, given years denied to him, pens volumes that alter the course of thought. Peace does not guarantee genius, but it grants time, and time itself is the soil from which creation grows. Imagine a village street at dusk. Children run, chasing one another, their laughter rising into the evening. Old men sit by doorways, pipes in their mouths, watching with weary contentment. Women draw water from wells, talking softly. It is an ordinary scene, but it is precisely what war denies. In our history, such streets were emptied, such laughter silenced, such wells left untended. But in this imagining, they remain alive. The extraordinary gift of peace is not glory, but ordinariness, the simple continuation of days. And yet, even in this vision, shadows linger. For peace does not erase hunger, disease, injustice. It does not prevent sorrow, nor does it guarantee harmony. Some will still die young, some will still suffer, but they will suffer within the rhythm of life, not the chaos of war. They will die as all must die, not as pawns sacrificed in the games of kings. Their grief will be natural, not imposed. The lives unlived remind us that history is not only battles and treaties, but the countless unseen threads that bind families, communities, generations. When Napoleon accepts peace, those threads are not cut so quickly. They weave onward, fragile but enduring, forming patterns unseen in the real world but visible here in imagination. The final image is of footsteps on a village street. One pair, then another, then many, weaving paths through dust and stone. They are not the boots of soldiers, heavy and harsh, but the soft tread of children, of lovers, of neighbors. The sound is quiet, almost unnoticed, yet it fills the air with continuity. Lives go on, futures unfold, the tapestry remains unbroken. And from these footsteps, from the echo of ordinary lives preserved, the vision rises once more toward the battlefield that never came. For history as we know it led to Waterloo, that thunderous climax of empire and ambition. But in this imagining, the field lies untouched, its soil never turned to mud by cannon fire. And so we turn now to the shadow of Waterloo, that great moment that in this world was never cast. The sound of footsteps in village streets, soft and unhurried, fades into a silence wider than any village could hold. It becomes the silence of an empty plain, a field in Belgium where history in one world thundered, but in this imagining remains untouched. Waterloo, name of legend, name of tragedy, name of finality. In our history, its soil turned to mud beneath the boots of thousands, its skies filled with cannon smoke, its streams ran red. But in the world where Napoleon accepted peace in 1813, this field is quiet. No drums beat here, no cavalry charge across its ridges, no desperate cries echo at dusk. The shadow of Waterloo is never cast, Imagine the plain as it might have been on that June morning. The grass sways gently in the breeze, dew glistens in the rising Sunday. Farmers tend their crops, their oxen pulling plows slowly through furrows. Birds wheel overhead, their songs unbroken by cannon fire. Children chase one another across meadows, their laughter scattering flocks of crows. The land knows only the rhythm of seasons, not the chaos of battle. And yet, even in its peace, the place hums with a strange stillness, as though it remembers the weight of a destiny it was spared. What becomes of those who, in our history, were drawn here by war? Arthur Wellesley, Duke of Wellington, whose name became forever bound to Waterloo, may never gain the immortal fame that battle secured. His campaigns in Spain already made him respected, but without Waterloo he is remembered as a soldier of competence, not the iron commander who stood unbroken against Napoleon's final charge. Perhaps he turns to politics sooner, shaping Britain in Parliament, rather than on the field. Perhaps his fame dims, eclipsed by others, his legacy altered by absence of this one great day. And what of Blücher, the Prussian general whose arrival on the battlefield sealed Napoleon's fate? Without Waterloo, his name may linger in Prussian annals, but not in European memory. His army never marches to decisive triumph. His role in history becomes smaller, a man of courage remembered by some but not by all. The roar of his troops crying, "Forward!" is never heard across the Belgian fields, never etched into legend. And Napoleon himself? Without Waterloo, his story does not end in sudden collapse. There is no 100 Days, no desperate gamble, no capture and exile to St. Helena. His legend, instead of a flame extinguished in thunder, smolders on quietly. He remains emperor of a smaller France, still powerful, still respected, perhaps fading into old age in Paris rather than dying on a remote island. His story becomes not of tragic downfall, but of transformation, of survival. The shadow that Waterloo cast over his name in reality never falls in this imagining. Consider the soldiers, tens of thousands who in our history marched toward death on that field. The young British infantrymen who never lived past 19, the French cavalrymen whose charge ended in mud, the Prussian drummer boy struck before he could flee. These lives in our imagining continue. They plow fields, marry sweethearts, raise families. Their descendants, unbroken lines, walk in worlds that reality denied. The absence of Waterloo is not only a silence of cannon, but the presence of lives, whole and enduring. Yet even in peace, the absence of battle leaves questions. Without Waterloo, where does Europe find its decisive moment? Does another battlefield rise elsewhere, later? Does the rivalry simmer rather than explode, leading to conflicts scattered and smaller? Or does peace hold, fragile but real, and the 19th century marches forward without the punctuation of Napoleon's final gamble? History without Waterloo is a history without climax, a tale whose tension dissolves rather than erupts. Picture the field at twilight. The sun dips low, painting the sky in crimson and gold. In our history, that twilight saw broken armies retreating, the wounded crying for water, the dead lying in heaps. Here, it sees only quiet. Farmers return from their work. The bells of distant churches toll vespers. The air fills with the scent of earth freshly turned. The silence is profound, but it is not empty. It is full of what might have been spared. And yet, without Waterloo, Europe also loses something else. The shared memory of a moment that defined nations. Britain built its pride upon Wellington's stand, Prussia upon Blücher's charge, France upon Napoleon's defiance, even in defeat. Without it, their identities shape themselves differently. Britain still holds empire, Prussia still rises, France still endures, but the stories they tell themselves change. Nations are built not only by victories, but by the myths they craft, and in this imagining, the myth of Waterloo never forms. Other myths, other stories, take its place. The final image is of drums in silence. A drum, skin taut, waits in a tent at the edge of the empty plain. In one history, it would have beaten furiously, calling men to battle. In this one, it lies still. Its beat never struck. The silence is heavier than sound, as though the world itself listens for something that never comes. The shadow of Waterloo never falls, and in that absence Europe becomes something else, undefined, unbroken, unscarred by that single day. And from this silence, from the drum that never beat, the vision turns toward another realm of history, not battlefields or crowns, but memory itself. For if Waterloo never comes, how does the world of letters, of art, of music remember Napoleon? What stories are told when the tragedy is denied, when the myth must be rewritten? The pen now replaces the sword, and imagination must weave what battle never gave. The drum lies silent in its tent, its skin never struck, and the silence stretches outward, not only across the empty field of Waterloo, but into the minds of poets, painters, composers, and storytellers, who in our history made that battle a symbol. For if Waterloo never comes, how then is Napoleon remembered? What songs are sung? What verses penned? What canvases painted? In a world where the emperor endures not as fallen Titan, but as sovereign who chose peace. Memory itself bends with history, and literature, which thrives on tragedy, must seek other forms when the climax is denied. In our world, poets made of Napoleon a figure of drama. Byron saw in him the embodiment of ambition and ruin. Victor Hugo painted his downfall with grandeur. Beethoven, who once admired him, turned symphonies into protest at his arrogance. Waterloo gave them a stage, a final act, a fall to mourn and mythologize. But in this imagining, what muse would they find in a man who survived? Would Byron still write with fire of the eagle who fell? Or would he turn to irony, mocking the emperor who traded sword for pen? Would Hugo see him not as Prometheus punished, but as a Caesar domesticated, diminished by compromise? Without tragedy, the legend is altered, quieter, more ambiguous. Imagine a painter in Paris, setting brush to canvas. In one history, he paints Napoleon at St. Helena, gazing at the horizon, exile etched in his face, a hero ruined. In this alternate world, his subject is different. Napoleon at a desk, surrounded by ministers, issuing laws, a ruler rather than a martyr. The painting is less dramatic, less romantic, but perhaps more enduring. The emperor becomes not a fallen star, but a steady sun, shining less brilliantly, but longer. The art of memory shifts from tragedy to longevity. And what of the people? In our history, the French remembered Napoleon with both nostalgia and sorrow, his name a rallying cry for decades, his legend fueling revolutions. The image of the man betrayed, cast down, exiled, gave them both grief and inspiration. But if he remains ruling in peace, what then? Perhaps their memory softens, less fiery, less mythic. They see him not as the tragic hero, but as the father of law, of institutions, of stability. He becomes a figure less romantic but more practical, less storm but more foundation. The cult of Napoleon might be weaker, but the fabric of his legacy stronger. In Britain, too, the absence of Waterloo changes memory. Without that battle, the nation lacks the dramatic triumph it celebrated for generations. The Duke of Wellington becomes less legend, more politician. The songs of victory are quieter, the pride less sharp. Britain still boasts empire, still rules the seas, but it does not carry Waterloo as its banner. Perhaps Trafalgar remains the greater symbol, or perhaps another moment rises to fill the void. Memory reshapes itself, seeking new anchors. In Prussia, without Blucher's charge at Waterloo, national pride takes longer to coalesce. The memory of liberation from Napoleon remains, but the decisive climax is missing. Their story becomes one of endurance rather than triumph, of waiting rather than seizing. Literature and history, deprived of a grand finale, may linger in longing, in frustration, until another generation finds its myth at Königgrätz or Sedan. The German imagination, so often nourished by great battles, must wait. Russia, too, sees Napoleon differently. Without his final fall, the story of Moscow's burning does not close with justice served. Instead, the Tsar must weave new meaning, portraying Napoleon as contained but not destroyed. Russian literature, steeped in spirituality and destiny, might paint him not as a fallen Satan, but as a restless figure confined within limits, a phantom of ambition forever checked but never erased. Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, later generations. What inspiration would they find in a world where Napoleon aged quietly instead of collapsing in flame? Perhaps Tolstoy's War and Peace, if written at all, would sing a different tune. Less about the inevitability of defeat, more about the strangeness of survival. And beyond Europe, across oceans, what of the legend? In Latin America, where revolutionaries drew inspiration from both Napoleon's rise and fall, the absence of Waterloo changes their rhetoric. Bolivar might still speak of liberty, but his comparisons shift from the tragic conqueror to the enduring lawgiver. The tone of speeches, the metaphors of pamphlets, the imagery of independence all bend subtly, shaped by the example that endured rather than collapsed. Memory thrives on tragedy. Yet it also respects endurance. Without exile, without a lonely death on St. Helena, Napoleon's story loses its sharp edge of sorrow, but gains a different texture. The tale of a man who chose survival, who remade himself, who reigned not to the last gasp of defiance, but to the slow march of years. Would this make him less beloved, less feared, less mythologized? Or would it make him more real, more human, more lasting? The question lingers, unresolved, echoing through galleries, libraries, and concert halls. Picture a library in Paris, the shelves heavy with books. In one world, volumes about Napoleon are filled with pathos, with lament, with grandeur. In this one, they are filled with analysis, with reflection, with measured admiration. The tone is different, the myth transformed. The silence of Waterloo has altered the sound of every page. The final image is of a blank sheet of paper lying upon a desk. In one history, it was filled with poems of tragedy, paintings of downfall, symphonies of defiance. In this one, it waits for words never written, for images never painted, for songs never sung. The page remains open, its ink delayed, its story unfinished. And from this page, blank and waiting, the vision moves forward to another kind of story, the story of revolutions themselves. For if Napoleon survives in peace, how are the storms of 1848, those uprisings that shook every throne, altered? Do they arrive sooner, delayed, or transformed entirely? The clock of revolution ticks, but in this alternate Europe, its hands may point to another hour. The blank sheet of paper rests upon the desk, its surface waiting for words, its silence heavy with possibility. And in that silence, another sound begins to rise, the ticking of a clock. Each second falls like a drop of water, steady, inevitable. For Europe, even in peace, the clock of revolution continues to mark its time. In our history, 1848 arrived like a storm, sweeping across the continent, toppling thrones, shaking cities, filling the air with barricades and songs of liberty. But if Napoleon accepts the Frankfurt Proposal, if the empire survives and peace holds, what happens to that storm? Is it delayed, transformed, or does it arrive with even greater force? Consider France, where the memory of 1789 lingers like a ghost in every square, every law, every dream. In our world, Napoleon's fall in 1815 returned the Bourbons, restored monarchy, and reignited resentment. The people, denied stability, longed again for change, and by 1848 the spark became fire. But in this imagining, no Bourbon restoration occurs. The empire endures, smaller but steady, its codes and schools shaping generations. Under Napoleon's watch, and perhaps under his heirs, France grows accustomed to order. Do the fires of revolution dim in such a world? Perhaps the people, granted stability and prosperity, no longer hunger for barricades. Or perhaps the very endurance of an empire born from revolution keeps the idea alive, simmering until new generations demand not merely order, but freedom. In Vienna, where Metternich's hand directs diplomacy, the revolutions of 1848 erupted in our history with particular fury, sweeping away his carefully built system. But if peace had been secured earlier, if balance had been achieved under Napoleon's survival, perhaps Metternich's vision proves more durable. Conferences, treaties, and councils might provide safety valves, releasing pressure through reform before it explodes. The Austrian Empire, fragile in reality, may endure longer, its people quieter, its nationality subdued not by violence but by diplomacy. Yet one cannot suppress longing forever. The Hungarians, the Czechs, the Italians all dream of self-rule. Peace may delay the moment, but the clock continues to tick. And in Germany, where students whisper of unity in taverns, the revolutions of 1848 brought songs, flags, assemblies. In this alternate path, with Napoleon still enthroned in Paris, the dream of unity may be altered. Instead of erupting in fire, it may creep forward in slow negotiations, in cultural movements, in economic ties. The Zollverein, the customs union, may form earlier, binding German states with trade instead of barricades. The empire's shadow across the Rhine may keep the dream alive but restrained, transforming it from violent outbursts to gradual construction. Or perhaps, precisely because France endures, the hunger for unity sharpens, and when revolution comes, it arrives with fiercer urgency, aimed not only at princes, but at the shadow of Napoleon's legacy itself. In Italy, too, the fires of 1848 were stoked by frustration, by the weakness of kingdoms, by foreign domination. With Napoleon's France still powerful, Italy's path may change. Perhaps France lends support to Italian aspirations, seeing them as a tool against Austria. Or perhaps France, more cautious in this alternate peace, avoids meddling, leaving Italy fragmented longer. The revolutions might flare weaker, or they might burn hotter, depending on whether the people see France as ally or obstacle. And beyond Europe, the revolutions of 1848 were not isolated. They resonated across oceans, inspiring movements in Latin America, echoing in debates in the United States. In our imagining, where Napoleon's empire survives, the world sees a France that embodies both revolution and empire, both change and stability. This paradox may inspire differently. Reformers may argue for gradual transformation rather than sudden revolt, or radicals may point to the contradiction as proof that half measures never suffice. The ideas travel regardless, carried by books, by letters, by songs, by emigrants crossing the Atlantic with stories of what might have been. Picture the streets of Paris in 1848 as they were, barricades built from cobblestones, red flags waving, shots cracking through alleys. In this alternate history, those streets may remain quiet, their stones unmoved, their flags furled. Or perhaps they see demonstrations instead of revolutions, protests instead of uprisings. The people march, but the empire endures, adapting, bending, reshaping itself. Or perhaps the barricades rise later, in 1860, in 1870, in another year entirely, the storm delayed but gathering force all the while. The clock ticks, but the hour changes. The revolutions deferred remind us that peace is never a permanent answer, only a postponement. The questions of liberty, of unity, of nationhood, of justice cannot be silenced forever. In our history, they burst forth in 1848. In this imagining, they may creep, they may wait, they may arrive with thunder in another season. But they arrive, for clocks do not cease, only pause. Imagine a great clock tower at midnight. The hands move, but the chimes are delayed. The people gather below, waiting, listening. When the bell finally tolls, its sound may be softer or louder, its meaning gentler or harsher. but it tolls nonetheless. So it is with revolution in this world. Deferred or transformed, it remains. The final image is of the clock itself, its pendulum swinging steadily, its face lit by moonlight. The air is hushed, the hands approach the hour, but the bell is silent for now. When it rings, it will carry the voices of peoples across Europe, not in 1848 as we know it, but in another time, another form, shaped by Napoleon's survival and the Peace of Frankfurt. The silence before the chime holds both promise and dread. And from that silence, from the clock that waits, the vision spirals back, weaving together all the threads, people, armies, monarchs, revolutions, industries, into a tapestry of possibility. The story of this alternate Europe is no straight line, but a spiral, circling back upon itself, layers upon layers of what might have been. And so we now turn to gather these threads, to see how the spiral forms a pattern, fragile yet vast, in the great weave of history. The clock face glows in moonlight, its hands poised though the chime is withheld, and from that silence the vision spirals outward, drawing together all that has passed in this long imagining. For history in its truth is a line, sharp and unforgiving, but in our reflections it becomes a spiral, circling back upon itself, weaving layers of meaning. Each part of this journey, France's relief, Britain's unease, Austria's chessboard, Germany's longing, Spain's scars, Russia's visions, the Ottoman's fragility, the America's whispers, the forges of industry, the monarch's anxieties, the lives unlived, the shadowless Waterloo, the unwritten poems, the revolutions deferred, each is a strand. Alone they are fragile, but together they form a tapestry of possibility, shimmering in the candlelight of imagination. Picture Europe as a loom, its threads stretched taut across the frame. The weavers are kings and emperors, but also peasants and workers, inventors and poets, all pulling, all binding. In our history, the shuttle passed one way, weaving a cloth of war and defeat. In this imagining, the shuttle takes another path, the cloth woven with different colors, softer perhaps, but no less complex. The spiral does not erase the past, but overlays it, like two tapestries hung side by side, their patterns echoing yet diverging. At the center of this spiral sits Napoleon himself, the man of hesitation, quill poised above parchment. Around him swirl the possibilities. Paris filled with bells, marshals restless, Britain suspicious, Austria cautious, Germany fragmented, Spain scarred, Russia torn, the Ottomans wavering, the Americas restless, the forges glowing, monarchs anxious, poets uncertain, lives spared, Waterloo absent, revolutions waiting. Each possibility curves back toward him, as though the world itself circles the man, waiting for the scratch of his pen. And yet the spiral carries us beyond him too, for though Napoleon is its axis, the possibilities belong not only to him, but to all who lived in his time. The soldier spared at Leipzig, the widow reunited with her son, the student writing poems instead of marching, the shepherd in Spain, the miner in Belgium, the sailor in Havana, the teacher in Paris, all are threads in this spiral. Their lives, unlived in reality, become vivid in imagination, voices within the great chorus of what might have been. The spiral also touches the far future. Without Waterloo, does Europe still march to 1914 to the trenches of another world war? Without revolutions in 1848, does liberty come later or differently or not at all? Without the collapse of Napoleon, does nationalism grow slower or faster, more fragmented or more unified? These questions circle without resolution, each answer opening into another question, another curve of the spiral. Imagine the map of Europe as drawn in classrooms, borders traced in ink, rivers marked, cities circled. In one history, these lines shift after 1815, redrawn at Vienna, solidified in treaties. In this imagining, they shift differently, subtly altered by peace in 1813. The Rhine remains France's shield, Germany's frontier, Austria's concern. Italy's patchwork endures longer. Spain limps but survives. Russia waits watching. The Ottoman Empire clings. The Americas breathe revolution. Britain turns to empire overseas. The pattern is not fixed, but fluid, its lines curling like smoke from a candle, visible for a moment before dissolving into air. The spiral teaches us that no possibility is final. Each path leads to another, each choice to a new fork. Napoleon's acceptance of the Frankfurt Proposal does not end history but reshapes it, scattering new seeds, altering the soil. Some seeds grow into peace, others into unrest, others into wonders unseen. The spiral never stops. It only widens, circling outward until it disappears beyond sight. Picture again the chamber in Paris where it all began. The fire burns low, the candles gutter. The parchment lies before him, the quill still poised, the ink drop trembling. Around that moment all of Europe waits, the spiral turning silently, layer upon layer of possibility unfurling into the night. The sound is faint, like the turning of a wheel, like the rustle of cloth as it is woven. It is the sound of history imagined, not as certainty but as possibility. And from that chamber, from that quill hovering above its page, we prepare to return once more to where we began. For the spiral must close its circle, not with resolution but with reflection. The story that started with hesitation will end with it too. The quill forever poised, the choice forever open, the world forever changed by what might have been. The spiral turns, its threads glimmering as they circle outward, and then slowly it begins to curve back, folding inward, drawing us again toward its center. All the possibilities, the bells of Paris, the whispers in Vienna, the cries of guerrillas in Spain, the hymns of Russia, the murmurs of the Americas, the forges of industry, the silences of unwritten poems draw inward, converging on a single point. That point is the chamber in Paris. Late in the year 1813, the candles low, the fire crackling softly, the air heavy with the scent of smoke and wax. Napoleon sits alone at his desk, the Frankfurt Proposal before him, the quill suspended, the ink drop trembling as though the weight of the world rests upon its tip. Outside, the city is quiet. The streets glisten with rain, the lamps flicker along the Seine, and in homes across France families speak in hushed tones of hope and fear. Beyond France, the continent itself holds its breath. Britain's harbors creak with unease, Austria's maps lie waiting, Prussia dreams of unity, Spain mourns its wounds, Russia remembers fire, the Ottomans listen for storms, the Americas whisper of freedom. All Europe, all the world, bends toward this one moment, this one man, this one choice. In reality, he refused. He hesitated too long, demanded too much, gambled once more, and the dice turned against him. From that refusal came Leipzig, came Waterloo, came exile, came death far from home, came legend built from tragedy. That is the history we know, the history inscribed in books, in paintings, in memory. But in our imagining, we linger in the pause, in the moment before refusal, in the breath before the chime, in the quill before the stroke. Here, he signs. Here, the story bends. Imagine the sound, the faint scratch of pen upon parchment. It is quiet, almost imperceptible, yet it ripples outward like thunder disguised as whisper. The treaties are sealed, the armies stand down, the bells ring, the forges glow, the children laugh, the poets hesitate, the revolutions wait. Europe moves not into fire, but into twilight, uncertain yet less scarred. The world is not healed, but it is changed. And yet the question remains, would peace have endured? Would Napoleon have grown into a statesman or chafed against the chains of compromise? Would monarchies have adapted or clung to fear until revolt shattered them anyway? Would industry have burned brighter in calm, or dimmer without the urgency of war? Would the lives spared be balanced by freedoms delayed? The spiral offers no certainty. It only invites us to walk its curves, to imagine its patterns, to hold in our minds the weight of possibility. Picture once more the emperor in his chamber. The candles flicker low, the ink darkens, the parchment glows faintly in firelight. His hand moves, or perhaps it does not. The choice hovers, fragile, eternal. For in imagination, unlike in history, the moment never closes. The quill remains poised, the ink drop never falls, the silence stretches into infinity, and so we return to where we began, with a man, a desk, a proposal, and a hesitation that could have reshaped the world. As you listen now, wherever you are in a quiet room at night, in the solitude of your own thoughts, you too hold that moment. You too linger in the pause, the breath before history, the silence before the word. The final image is of the quill itself, its tip glistening with ink, suspended above the page. The sound of the fire fades, the candles gutter, the chamber dissolves into darkness. All that remains is the question, open and unresolved. How much of the world rests upon a single hesitation? The silence deepens. The story fades. And the spiral closes, leaving you with the stillness of possibility, the invitation to dream, and the gentle weight of sleep.